Welcome. It's very good to see you. Lots of numbers coming up. Welcome to this very exciting event as part of the En route to COP series. We are going to be discussing something extremely important for this decade of climate action, which is question mark, is this the end of the internal combustion engine for freight? Thank you so much for joining us. We have a great lineup of speakers this afternoon or this morning, wherever you are. And as you know, this is organized by the Transport Decarbonization Alliance. My name is Monica Araya. I am the transport lead at Climate Champions. We'll tell you more about the plans we have ahead of us. But first of all, I would like to make sure that everybody is coming on board. I see the numbers coming up. So I think in a few minutes, we will have everybody with us. We're going to be here for about 2 hours and a half. We will hear from speakers from the government, from the governmental side. We're going to hear from companies. We're going to have some closing remarks. And toward the end, we're going to give you time to be part of this virtual conversation. So we will have time for group discussions. Let's go to the next slide to give you a sense of what we have for you as part of this program. So next slide, please. So before we get started, it's very important for the organizers of this session to remind everyone that this is part of a bigger sequence. For 3 days, you will have options to be part of 11 discussions. If you go online, for example, to the Transport Decarbonization Alliance page, you will find all the information about how you can join. And here you can scan the QR code and you can join many other discussions. For example, tomorrow or the next day, and everything will be recorded. So if you miss them, you can check later on. So let's go now to the 2 key words that bring us together this afternoon. One is raising ambition, and the other one is supporting action. So ambition and action are key for this panel we're going to have. Ambition about, it's ambition in the context of zero emission freight is going to be a track that is about bringing together many governments that are front runners. And we will hear about that from one of the leading voices in the space, the Minister of Environment of the Netherlands. And she will tell us more about how to raise ambition when it comes to this race to zero emission freight. And then we are also going to talk about supporting action on the ground. And we're going to hear from front runners in the private sector. So we have very good speakers that will complement each other. And then before we go into the actual discussion of raising ambition and supporting action, we have a fantastic speaker who's going to give us a very brief overview, and he has lots of great materials. There won't be enough time to go into details, so rest assured that all those slides will be recorded and you can always get in touch and get them because they will have a lot of details. Without further ado, let's introduce our very first speaker who is going to share with us very concrete insights. Let's move to the next slide, please. So we have Bill van Amburg. Bill comes from California. He has played a leading role, CalSTART in particular, has played a leading role in a lot of very transformative actions and decisions that California has taken, putting them at the center of this frontrunner club. So Bill, thank you so much for being with us. I look forward to hearing you, and I'm sure the panelists and the participants too. So floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Monica. And really those 2 watchwords of raising ambition and taking action are really the key issues we want to focus on. Really good evening and good morning, of course, to everybody, wherever you are, whatever time zone you're in. It's so great to be with you here today. And let's move right into it because we've got a lot of material that we would like to cover. And we are at a true inflection point right now when the urgency of change is really intersecting with the reality of the tools that we now have at our hands to make that change real. Let's go to the next slide, Chris. So we can see that there are real vehicles now moving into production. This is something that we've been waiting for the last 2 years, but we now see it. Major manufacturers, as well as the emerging born EV companies, as we call them, starting production in 2021 and 2022 with urban service and delivery vehicles. Next slide. It's not just there. It's also in heavier duty vehicles that are used to move freight around our urban regions. You can see these largest vehicles on the screen moving into production either late this year or early in 2021. And in Europe, Scania, Iveco, and Daimler as well is starting to move into production towards next year. Next slide. Now, we all know why this is important. Transport is becoming the biggest sector for climate emissions, and commercial vehicles in general, specifically freight vehicles, are really growing in their impact. They're not slowing down. Next slide. Perhaps just as critical for our growing urban cities, commercial vehicles are by far the biggest source of urban air pollution that we must grapple with. They cause harm to all, but particularly to frontline communities closest to highways and freight facilities, and these people have suffered too long. Next slide. Also, our COVID experience has really exacerbated and accelerated a trend that we've seen for quite a while now, but e-commerce has grown substantially over this last year of the COVID experience. And this has meant additional delivery and logistics vehicle trips, again, focused on our cities. That's why it is so urgent that action be pronounced, and it's an opportune time for zero-emission commercial vehicles, particularly freight vehicles, because the launch points of success for electrification are actually in our urban duty cycles. This is where the first products will really see their first success and really pay back to the user. So we must really focus our resources and policies on making these action applications take hold and grow over the next decade. Next slide. The good news is the vehicles are really coming to market, as I pointed out before. We actually are tracking these, hundreds of them, in our Zero Emission Technology Inventory, or ZEFV as we call it, an online tool. Next slide. For example, in North America, we're actually going to be seeing vehicle availability double by 2023. A huge growth of vehicles in the medium duty delivery and service space, but also a pretty substantial growth in those largest vehicles that transport freight around our urban regions. Next slide. Now, as we all know, California has invested a lot in vehicles and infrastructure and incentives and the like, but this year they also added another tool, a zero-emission vehicle regulation. It's called the Advanced Clean Truck Rule. It requires a meaningful percentage of sales to start in 2024 and then ramp up from there. Fleet purchases will be added to this. Next slide. Now, this ACT framework is really interesting because 15 states in the United States and the District of Columbia have adopted the goals of ACT. And we are in beginning discussions with nations around the world about using this as a framework for ambitions. And if we do this, the market signals around the world would be clear and powerful. Next slide. Indeed, we are changing and refining our Drive to Zero campaign goals to actually match. And if you'd click on that, Chris, we can see the change. We're adding this 30% and 100% goal into our Drive to Zero campaign. Next slide. But while goals are critical, they are not enough. It takes smart actions and investments. And that's the other part of what we discussed today. Infrastructure in particular, I must emphasize, needs to become a bigger focus. When we grow to hundreds of trucks per site instead of ones and twos, the scale of power demand and infrastructure grows substantially. So too does the need for regional and eventually corridor fast charge hubs. So infrastructure will be a limiter of our transition if we do not rapidly address it, plan for it, and fund it. Next slide. So as we meet today, I urge two things. Certainly alignment around a common set of strong global goals. This is critical for driving cost reductions and building a strong supply chain, but back up those goals with action plans to make this transformation move as quickly as it must. Purchase assistance, use benefits or requirements, infrastructure planning and investment. Next slide, please, Chris. It's an exciting time. We have passed barrier 1. Vehicles are becoming available, and that's exciting. Now we must clear the way for them to become the dominant urban vehicle by 2030 and take on longer distance work in the years beyond that. Thank you for this opportunity to set the stage this morning. I look forward to our discussions. Monica, I give it back to you.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for saying so much in a few minutes. And this is very exciting times. And now I'm also very excited to introduce the next keynote speaker, the Minister of Environment of the Netherlands, where I am. I always enjoy when she speaks because it's clear, it's concrete, ambitious. So welcome, Minister Stientje van Veldhoven. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I'm trying to start my video, but it seems that the host has disabled it. So I think there's something for you to do there. Thanks anyway, Monica, it's good to see you again. And it was also great, Bill, to hear your brief and your very clear introduction. And especially if you look at the growth in e-commerce at this moment, I think we all see all of those vans driving our streets every day. It can only underline the huge task that we have ahead of us. I think that there is one very, very prominent question for us all. That is the end of the internal combustion engine coming for freight? And let's make that answer very clear. Yes, it is. 5 years ago, we put our signatures to the Paris Agreement, and we agreed on the analysis, on the problem, the tasks, the solutions, and the goals. And yet, CO2 emissions are still increasing, especially in transport. I think Bill outlined that perfectly. And then if you look at trucks, they account for only 2% of the vehicles on the road, yet they are responsible for 22% of road transport emissions in the EU. And that could more than double by 2050 due to the continued growth in freight demand. So zero-emission commercial vehicles are really key to curb increasing freight emission. It's my ambition to keep the importance of freight high on the political agenda. If you look at the potential for and the benefits, we really need to make work of this. I just mentioned the business case in the opening keynote of this conference. And the business case is very clearly a healthy planet, clean air, healthy people, and millions of new jobs around the globe needed to replace the old vehicle fleet. So it's a huge effort, and we need to join hands for this. It is really a joint race to zero-emission trucking. But despite all the goodwill, all the good intentions of each of us involved, I do see a kind of surplus. We are waiting for one another to set steps and then to follow. But that's not my idea. We're racing together and we're moving forward together. So my idea, my plea to you is about taking actions. And we all need to take actions because together we can go further and faster. So what do governments need to do? Governments need to set clear targets for medium and heavy duty vehicles and create the necessary frameworks with policies and incentives. That is why we are working on a global memorandum of understanding, driven and inspired, I must say, by California's leadership and their 15-state MOU with a solid bottom line. That solid bottom line being countries commit to at least 30% of new freight vehicles to be zero emissions by 2030 and 100% by 2050. And frontrunners should strive for 100% sooner. And I know California already has, so my compliments. Moreover, we need non-state actors too. Cities committing to zero-emission freight by 2030. And in the Netherlands, up to 40 cities will announce zero-emission zones for freight by 2025. We're hoping to have the first batch as of January. So I'm really excited. We're going to have in at least 20 cities in the Netherlands, logistical zero-emission zones, moving forward, moving the market forward and showing it can be done. Fleet owners and retailers should announce purchase and procurement commitments to be made before COP26 for medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicles for 2030, also above 7.5 tons. Industry can make public commitments on the production of zero emission medium and heavy duty vehicles in the run up to COP26. And infrastructure shareholders must ensure interoperability and user-friendly energy infrastructure, both hydrogen and electric. All is necessary and available for all vehicle types in all regions. And then finally, financial institutions should curb their financial instruments and investments in favor of zero-emission alternatives. And I'll be working with the World Bank also to see if we can come up with some recommendations in the run-up to COP26. We need all of this to happen in sync. So we shouldn't wait for one another, but try to move ahead together. We can jointly make this happen. It's not the future, it is really in the present, and it is for us now to drive and make the best of this race to zero-emission trucking. We are together, Team Future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I love Team Future, and I do hope that every country will get a minister who is so passionate about zero-emission freight. So it's very inspiring to hear you. Thank you for your leadership. We're going to turn now to a panel that will bring diverse perspectives. It's going to, it's going to have the minister with us. It's going to have somebody from California, from Rotterdam, from the European Commission, and from Mexico. So it's really diverse. And let's just get started with California. We have Sydney Vergis. She is the division chief at the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, the great CARB. They have really set the pace for this transition. So Sydney, welcome. Thank you for joining us from California.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. So I really appreciate today's event. I've recently been reflecting on how far electrification has come and how quickly that has happened. Just a few years ago, if you recall, we were debating whether or not light commercial trucks could be electrified. And now there's seemingly a new product announcement every day. And now, at least in terms of the US market, at least 8 large manufacturers have announced that they are in production or will be in production by 2022 for zero-emission long-haul trucks. As many of you are aware, and as Bill alluded to before, we've been long motivated as a state to our commitment to clean air and combating global climate change. We have communities that have been suffering from public health impacts of concentrated vehicle pollution for far too long. So what you see in Governor Newsom's recent executive order is reflective of the California perspective, that zero-emission vehicles, both battery electric and hydrogen, and the passenger, medium, and heavy-duty space is really the best solution to help meet our goals and protect public health. And what we're hearing from industry is that the future is electric. But I think the real question, and what's brought us all here today, is how can we all work together to ensure that consumers worldwide have this expanded choice for zero emissions. We in California know that we can't drive this world market alone. OEMs, truck manufacturers respond to global policy signals. So the more regions of the world that align around common outcomes, the stronger our market signal is together. And so I'm so honored, that, the California experience with the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation, which requires manufacturers to sell increasing numbers of zero-emission trucks into the market, has become so resonant outside California's borders. So by working together, my hope is that, together we can grow the market faster, we can drive action, we can achieve scale, provide choice to consumers, and achieve our critical goals. And so with that, I'd just like to say that, we, the California Air Resources Board, really welcomes working with both national and subnational governments and the Drive to Zero campaign to help send those critical policy signals on zero-emission freight and truck technologies. So thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work that CARB does. I'm a big fan. So let's now turn to Rotterdam. Rotterdam is, the world talks a lot about Amsterdam, and I always get reminded that Rotterdam is doing a lot of work. So please share with us all the great work that you are doing in Rotterdam. We have the mayor, and I hope he is with us. I can't see it.
Yes, I'm with you.
Ahmed.
Yes.
Abu Taleb. Did I pronounce your name right? I hope so.
Well done. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being with us.
Jullie lamp even op mij richten, als je wil aanzetten met mij richten. Thank you for having me. I still remember my presence along with the Dutch delegation in Paris in COP26. And I'm happy to listen to our minister, Sintje van Veldhoven, who's really ambitious and really a woman to follow and to listen to. And we from Rotterdam see the minister and her policy really as a great support for local initiatives that we have. To understand Rotterdam, you have to know that we have the largest port in the Western Hemisphere. And that means we have here some 500 million tons of goods every year. we feed Europe, really. And I think that's really important to know that it's bringing a lot of wealth, more than 150,000 jobs. But at the same time, we are the largest polluter in the Netherlands with some 18%, 1/8. That's why we, for more than 10 years, are working hard to make the ports green, to work together with the industry, with the Port Authority, as we own the port together with the national government, so we have a duty to do so. And you may know also that in parts of my city, the life expectancy is really years lower than the average in the Netherlands. And that has not only to do with air pollution, but also with lifestyle, of course, but air pollution is a contributor to that process. So we have really a duty and a task to do. So we have a couple of initiatives. One of them is to design a program to clean the port. The Port Authority is working with the national government, huge investments, and also with the European Commission to catch a large portion of the CO2 emissions in the air, to make it liquid and to put it in huge pipeline and to transport it to empty oil and gas fields in the North Sea. We think that we can save in the Netherlands some 40% in the long run of the total CO2 emissions in the Netherlands by huge investments in the port. So transport and mobility for us is not only the fleets and the trucks, but also the vessels. And I'm happy to tell you that we, a couple of weeks ago, hosted the first large seagoing vessel on LNG. And that is really a big development when it comes to sea freight. The other thing is we designed, in collaboration with public and private institutions in the city, a deal with some 55 concrete plans, and one of them is on the mobility. But we also decided recently to invest more than 300 million euros local money in creating 7 green lungs, huge green spaces in the city, because we really believe that making the city green is also a source of new economy, so also leading to new jobs. And I'm happy to tell you that Shell, which is known for its big investments in fossil sources of energy, recently decided to build maybe the largest actual factory to make hydrogen from electricity. It's a complete green source of energy. And for me as a local mayor, maybe the most important thing talking about logistics and transports in the city is that as we speak, my vice mayor is signing an agreement with a big number of companies involved in transport, fleet owners and other parties, to build a so-called zero-emission zone for city logistics in 2025. And that means that at the suburbs of the city, there will be places where large quantities of goods can be stored, and from there, by eco-friendly mobile systems, brought to downtown Rotterdam and to other places in the city. And of course, if you want to make that a success, you need a collaboration with the Netherlands governments, with the national governments in general. Why? Because we have to generalize this technology so that these big companies in transport can use the same technology, the same systems, not only in the city of Rotterdam, but in Amsterdam, in Nijmegen, in other places. So that's really important that we standardize the technology. And of course, we need also the supranational support coming from Brussels, as the Green Deal of Timmermans, who I spoke recently, last Friday, is really, really keen on taking the Rotterdam as an example, as a show moment to show Europe how things can be done in collaboration with public, private, and national governments. So Rotterdam wants to be in the lead, and we want to be and stay a trusted partner. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mayor Abu Taleb. And I'm sure that Rotterdam will be a reference not only in Europe, but around the world. So all the best with all these big plans.
Thank you.
Let's go back to the minister. we know that the Netherlands is leading the way in many ways, and one of the concrete ways to argue the case that you are a leader is because there will be, let me make sure I get the number right, 40 cities that will have zero emission zones by 2025, which is around the corner. So my question is, from the perspective of what you have seen, what will it take for other countries to embrace ambitious targets? What is the one insight you want to share with us about that?
Well, the way that we make progress in the Netherlands is by putting together a national climate agreement. And as part of that climate agreement, we talked to all sectors because every sector has to decarbonize. And by drawing up plans for every sector, we were also able to tell every sector that they needed to contribute too, because all the other sectors were taking their part too. And we really did an analysis of what would be possible and how we could make things possible. We set ourselves a target, 49% reduction in 2030, and then we only started to discuss how, not if, we were going to reach that target. And discussing the how makes for a completely different dynamic than when you're discussing the if. And the how discussion in transport brought us to where is the low-hanging fruit. And then we saw that especially focusing on cleaning up the air in inner cities gave us multiple benefits. It's very good for health. It's very good for livability, livable cities. It saves a lot of place. So it saves a lot of CO2, and it gave us a perspective on how can we start this. And then we agreed that we would need to set in place all of the framework conditions that would be needed to get those inner city zero emission centers off the ground. So you need charging infrastructure, you need subsidies for small and medium enterprises to switch to zero emission trucks, etc. So we are putting in place together municipal governments, the transport sectors, the national governments, the regional governments, the electricity providers. We are putting together the entire package. And it is because each of those elements in the package is needed. And unless you work on this as a package, it will take too much time. So we're working in parallel, we're working on the package, coming from a discussion on the how, not the if. So stop discussing the if. We need to do this. Stop discussing the if. We've signed Paris Agreement. We know we need to do it. Start focusing on the how and ask what everybody needs from another party, and then put it together as a package and make sure the package is consistent and worked on in parallel, and then we can really get things going.
Thank you so much. That is very concrete, and I am going to recycle and recycle and recycle your message, making sure that many others hear it, because the power of how is that it allows us to put that energy into concrete action. So thank you for that. And I understand that you will have to leave us very soon. So thank you for taking the time to be with us.
It was a great pleasure, Monica. Thank you for all of your leadership and bringing everybody together. It's always a great pleasure to talk to you and to speak to all of these wonderful guests. And Amit and I are working on this at full speed in the Netherlands. You can count on us bringing this forward. And Rotterdam deserves all the compliments, as does the European Commission, because they have really great ambitions. We cannot do this as Netherlands alone. We really need a commission too. So looking forward to what Alex Paco has to say.
Thank you. We'll be working a lot together. So I look forward to next year. And combining all these points, we're hearing about the importance of a city, the importance of a state like California, the importance of national leadership. Now we are going to turn to the European Commission, and we're going to hear from the head of a unit that does a lot of work around this in particular. Alex Paco, welcome.
Yes.
I hope you're there. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for inviting me, and hello to everybody. And I'm very honored to speak after a minister from the Netherlands and the mayor from Rotterdam, who I think are really showing clear leadership, as well as our colleagues from CARB. I think we have a lot to learn from their side. But let me maybe just stress a couple of points, and in particular that today in Europe, we have a clear momentum to move towards zero-emission freight. And this is because we have this new European Green Deal, and the mayor from Rotterdam was stressing that indeed this is a very ambitious and important milestone for Europe, with the goal to become the first climate neutral continent and by 2050. And that requires action today, not in 2050. And that's why the Commission also proposed last September to increase the 2030 target for Europe from 40% to at least 55%. And that represents a huge step towards more ambition, and also requires to look again at all our legislation in Europe to make sure that indeed we are not just setting targets, objectives, but that we deliver through actual legislation. And a very important sector which will have to deliver is the road transport sector, because this is the only sector where in Europe we have seen emission growing in the last years. And despite efforts which have been done, we still remain on the wrong track. So to bring the emissions down and to reach climate neutrality by 2050, we will need to reduce emission of transport by 90%. So that's a huge challenge, but that's a challenge which is feasible. And our climate target plan has shown that indeed this also provides a lot of opportunities, business opportunities for Europe. So a very important step for us is to review the CO2 standards for new vehicles, because the CO2 standards are very strong drivers, both for reducing emissions, but also to bring new innovation into the sector. We see it already happening today with the new CO2 standards for heavy-duty vehicles, which were approved only a year ago. And already now we see manufacturers, and we will hear some of them later today, making further improvements in the internal combustion engine, but also making new investments in zero-emission vehicles, zero-emission trucks. We know it's still in the early phase, and we heard from Bill as well that a lot more vehicles are coming now in the showrooms and will come on the road, but more will need to be done from the regulatory side to provide really the clear signals which is needed for the sector. And we will also be looking at the CO2 standards for trucks, and this is foreseen in 2022 as part of a review of the legislation. We will be also be working on infrastructure. I think we heard it several times already. This is a very essential part of making this transition a success. And this requires legislation, but also financial support. And that's my last word, to say that also, despite the COVID crisis we are in, the recovery also offers a real opportunity to invest in the right direction. And investing in infrastructure is going to be a very important part. The European Commission has proposed a very significant package of support for the recovery of the crisis, and the European Green Deal is at the center of this recovery pathway. So we really believe that member states, business, but as well as cities will use the next couple of months and couple of years to really go towards this direction of zero emission mobility also in the freight sector. So thank you very much, and looking forward to the further debates among each other.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you for all the work that you do. It's very important in a lot of our debates to convey the message that, yes, we need markets and we need a lot of innovation and a lot of competition as well. But this is not going to happen fast enough with markets alone. So we do need regulation, and we do need strict CO2 standards. So thank you so much for reinforcing that, because sometimes that is lost in some debates. So let's now hear from Latin America, which makes me extremely happy, coming from Costa Rica. We have Daniela Munoz, who is the Director of Planning at the Ministry of Mobility of the very great city of Mexico, the great city of Mexico City, as we call it, Mexico DF. Daniela, we know that we heard from other speakers that zero emission zones make a big difference, and your city has shown a great leadership by joining the Green and Healthy Streets Declaration that basically is a commitment to create zero emission zones. And the question I had for you is whether in your thinking about that zero emission zones, you will also include very explicit elements of zero emission freight. What is your thinking and what is your plan for your city? The floor is yours and welcome. Bienvenida.
Thank you very much. Well, first, on behalf of Mexico City's government, I want to thank all the organizers for inviting us to this high-level panel to drive zero emission actions. It's very important for us to be able to share with all our peers around the world, especially European partners, and to really set down a common vision on how to decarbonize freight. So for Mexico City, we've been very committed since many years now into the Clean Air Act declaration from C40s, as well as the Healthy Street Declaration. But now, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are facing now two big challenges, as we are still containing the spread of the virus and fight for the economic impact of the shutdown measures. Mexico City has launched a very ambitious strategies towards recovery, where sustainable mobility has a great role to play. We set in line with the C40's major agenda for green and just recovery, a set of strategies that aim to recover, well, better building more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable city, so we can still reach the Paris goals. And here, freight transport has a critical role to reach out those two agendas. On the one hand, to reach the air quality goals, as this sector is responsible for 1/4 of particulate matter emissions, but also it has a great play to role in the economic recovery. And I think this is the big challenge of understanding how these two contained aspects play out. Since 2019, at the beginning of this administration, the Ministry of Mobility, together with the Ministry of Environment, we have built a common agenda to cut back emissions from the transport sector, as well, it accounts for 75% of green gas emissions in the city. And this is very understandable, as Mexico City is an 8 million inhabitant city, but on a daily basis, we account for more than 30 million trips every day, because it's a very large metropolitan area. So in view of this, last year we put in place a task force group at the metropolitan scale, where we have invited many stakeholders, especially fleet operators, businesses at large, and infrastructure operators as well. And we set three course of actions, so we can really put in place all these goals and be able to maintain economic activity. The first is accelerate the shift to zero emissions vehicles. So work together with suppliers and fleet operators to find a way for them to replace that their fleet. As you may know, Mexico and I think most of Latin American capital cities and cities at large account for a very old freight fleet fleet vehicles. They are like on average 15 to 20 years old. On the other hand, we also are working very close with academics and innovation clusters to also be able to have our own technology developed here, retrofitting, also seeing how we are going to put in place diesel filters into the existing fleet. Secondly, we are working together to allocate resources to improve infrastructure, because we know that if we do not enable access to inner city land, cargo would, it's not going to, we need to understand really their logistics needs in order to really be able to put in place all our regulations. So we are working in 2 pilot projects. The first one is in downtown, where we have as a factor already low carbon emission zone. Due to the pandemic, we closed down the city center, so we can be able to maintain the wholesale activity and also maintaining sanitary restrictions. And therefore, we are planning for the next months to put in place a more strict carbon emission zone, but by putting in place parking stations for freight and manage more efficiently our existing infrastructure. Also, we are working into integrating modal transport with trains and heavy duty trucks.
Excellent. Excellent.
And just to no, just to finish up and put in place all the regulations and the capacity building to really be able to monitor all these set of actions.
Wow, that's a lot of work. I'm sure you Daniela, are very busy, and I will have to bring this panel to a close, because we have other speakers in the next panel that might need to leave us. So because we're running a few minutes late, I hope that we have given you a sense of what is going on from different perspectives. Let's move. Thank you so much for the panelists. I hope some of you can stay. And let's now move very, very quickly to a very exciting part of the program, which is the announcement that we have. So let me bring to the floor Sita Holstlack.
Yeah, that's hard. Sorry.
Hi, Sita.
Hi, Monica.
Let's share good news with our audience.
Yes, thank you so much, Monica. So as Monica said, I'm Sita Holstlack. I work for the government of the Netherlands and leading on the freight work within the Transport Decarbonization Alliance. And as you all know, the national targets are super important, and very happy with the global MOU that our minister just announced. But we need the private sector to really make that happen, and non-state actors, so cities and regions. And I'm very happy that we'll be joining forces with the Race to Zero, Monica and Nigel as well, to really make that happen before COP. So we're really going to work with the private sector and our partners like EV100, CalSTART, World Economic Forum, Smart Freight Center, and the other action group partners to really make sure that those commitments are in place within the next couple of months, and that we'll announce what those commitments will be. So if you're a front-running country, city, or company, there'll be something for you in the Race to Zero freight. And I'm very happy to look forward to that collaboration with Race to Zero.
Excellent. I'm so looking forward to working together. And for those of you who hear Race to Zero and you don't know what it is a global campaign run by the 2 high-level climate action champions It's a team effort. It brings a lot of other partners. It's not just us. And if you Google it, you will find a website, and you will have more details about this in January when we have a specific site for the race to zero emission vehicles, and we will get started with zero emission vehicles for freight. So it's very exciting, and we will give you more details as we go along. I'm sure we could stay here for a few minutes, Sita and I, but we have to move on. And Sita, thank you so much for all the work you've done for the purpose of this great session that you have put together.
Thank you.
So let's move on to now the discussion about companies and what we need to do in order to go faster. So the next session is about hearing from the front runners what they are doing in the private sector. And just before we get started, you see on this slide some of the target or the headline messages that we have. For example, cities committing to zero emission freight by 2030. So this is the critical decade. There is no winning this decade without getting freight to move faster. We have a message for fleet owners and retailers to announce, for example, purchases and procurement commitments for vehicles of a certain weight, vehicle manufacturers committing to production and acceleration of that production of zero emission medium and heavy duty vehicles, infrastructure stakeholders ensuring the availability of both hydrogen and electric or electrification related infrastructure. And of course, we need money, and we need the financial institutions to bring instruments and investments in favor of zero emission technologies. So those are our headline messages. And now let's go to the actual panelists that we have. We have a great lineup. So we're going to hear from DHL, from Lafarge-Holcim, from Scania, from Iveco, and from EV Box. So let's get started with Uwe Grinks, the CEO of DHL Freight, the DHL Freight division. Uwe, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Oh, sorry, I apologize, Monica. So Uwe had to cancel last minute. So we'll move to Magali first, and then I suggest we do the reflections of Nigel in between, if that's okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Nigel Topping will have to go. So yeah, it's great that we can have them. So let's go then to Magali Anderson, Chief Sustainability Officer. Ooh. Sorry, let's go to Magali Anderson, Chief Sustainability Officer of Lafarge-Holcim.
Thank you, Monica. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here to talk about a topic that I think maybe is not something you are used to when you talk to the cement industry. So, you know, we announced recently our pledge. We actually announced it during New York Climate Week, and I'm so happy that Nigel Topping is on the panel with us, because he was part of that announcement and he helped us announcing it. In our sector, the pledge is pretty much about Scope 1 and Scope 2 emission, and we have committed to net zero, and I think we've done some pretty cool stuff there. But I'm here to talk about Scope 3. And Scope 3 is really something we don't talk about in our sector. We don't talk about it much at all. And I think it's because it's only 13% of our total emission. And you know, when you go with Science-Based Target Initiative, if it's below 40%, you actually don't have to commit on it. But then this only 13% represent 20 million tons. And I thought, you know what? I think it's about time that we take that very seriously. So, but the reason why we decided to do that is because about 3 years ago, we started something called Transportation Analytics Center, which is a center that monitors all our driving. So now I'm going to go into some few numbers. And remember, we are not a transportation company. We are a cement and concrete maker. So we do about 2 billion kilometers a year. We have about 100,000 trucks on the road at any given time. And this is in 75 countries. 95% of those trucks are third party. And I think I'm getting your attention right now, now that I've given those numbers. But the beauty is, thanks to our Transportation Analytics Center, is we monitor now 65% of those kilometers. So it means that we monitor about 50,000 trucks, again, real time, and that's about 1.3 billion kilometers per year. So again, I'm going to repeat it, 1.3 billion kilometers a year of that we monitor of truck transportation. I'm not even looking at cars here. I'm really looking at the big heavy vehicle, the ready-mix trucks, you know, the concrete trucks, the concrete mixers. There's a big truck that transport our product either in bulk or in bags. And I think the supply chain professionals or people from Scania and other companies like that fully comprehend what an incredible opportunity that is. So half of our Scope 3 is actually transportation and fuels. And it's actually very good news. It's very good news because now that we monitor all these kilometers, we actually can go into strategic mode. We can go into strategic mode in optimizing our network of warehouses, optimizing the routes, maybe go from trucks to rail to waterways, which is not that easy because we can't really move our cement plants that easily, etc., etc. But at least now we have really good data in hand to do something. And everything I've heard on the first session and on the keynotes, it's really given me fantastic hopes, because what I need here is everyone to move with me. You know, I'm super keen. So we took an objective, sorry, I forgot to say the most important. We took an objective of 20% reduction of our Scope 3 on the transportation and fuel by 2030. In all fairness, I'm absolutely not happy with that objective. It's way less than the objective we took on Scope 1 and 2, which is 40% reduction. And the reason why it's way less is because it's something we don't understand well enough. So I didn't want to over promise and under deliver. I usually prefer the contrary. But when I hear everyone talking before me, I think I'm going to now push my guys and say, let's go up on that number. Of course, we can do much more, and that's one of the reasons why we just signed the call for zero-emission freight vehicle. Because as a user, I'm not a maker of trucks, but as a user, I need your support. I need everyone to work together. The other thing is. What was interesting when we launched our Scope 3 work was the engagement of all the internal stakeholders. All our logistic and supply chain people were so happy to be part of that adventure, that they're all coming up with all kinds of projects. And, you know, okay, we are piloting that, and I won't give any tracks names because they're not necessarily the same than the people on the call today. But it just, it's incredible how they go. And I think it's really all about working together, because the reason why I gave you the numbers at the start is not just to show you how big we are, but it's more to understand our challenge. And again, the challenge is an opportunity, but I need to find the right technology. Those are big trucks. I need to find the right technology that works for the number we have, in the number of countries we have, etc., etc. Half of our trucks do less than 200 kilometers per day. I mean, half of our transportation, sorry, is less than 200 kilometers, half of our ways. And so really, we have very specific needs, and we need the help of everybody. And I will just finish by a little story. Is you know, we do open source innovation. We believe in it as a lot. We understand we won't be able to tackle the climate challenge by ourselves. And I think most people would never put together hackathon and cement or concrete. That's two words that normally don't go together. Well, we've done several now. And the last one we participated in was a hackathon in Zurich. Hack Zurich is called. I think it's one of the biggest of Europe. Was incredible. And the winning team was actually about smart trucking in Nigeria, on how to decarbonize our trucks in Nigeria. And that was great. It was so great. I actually showed it during the New York Climate Week panels with Nigel Topping. So I thought I would mention it now on the end of my talk. So I'm very excited by the journey. I think we can go really far. And don't forget that industries like ours, we don't make trucks, but we are incredible users, and we need your help to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Magali. And you said you found hope in the previous panel, and what you just told us gives us hope, because it's a great story, and it's great to have views from across the value chain. So we're going to now move to infrastructure, because we hear very often that infrastructure is a barrier. So we have the CEO of EVVox, Christoph, I have to concentrate to pronounce his name, Ferein Hoge. I would prefer if Christoph says his name. Christoph, you're very busy. Thank you for being with us. Tell us something about that argument that infrastructure can be a barrier. What is the one thing that we need to do in order to go faster and in order to deploy that infrastructure for charging? The floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Monica, for having me, and great to be at this event today. It's actually an honor to be here and to present EVVox Group, our perspective on how we realize zero-emission freight. As a company, we have actually three business models: electric vehicle charging, software solutions, and also the services. And we do that in Europe and the Americas. Let me start to welcome this initiative. I mean, as increased action on cutting freight and emissions is very much needed. In our company, we are all about realizing zero-emission transport future as soon as possible. We see electrification as the key solution, and we position ourselves in the center of the infrastructure challenge. We are about 10 years in business, and we are leading in the infrastructure build-out with EV charging solutions for cars, for vans, for commercial vehicles, as well as trucks. And so far, we have been installing more than 190,000 charging ports across the globe. And so we, as I said, we develop the hardware, the software solutions, and the total services. I think in this industry, in this movement, collaboration is really key. We have to team up with each other, with businesses, and indeed, it's in every aspect that I want to highlight. The infrastructure challenge for freight, but also for other segments in general, it's all about cross-sector collaboration. Utilities, grid operators, vehicle manufacturers, fleet operators, like the lady who just spoke, service operators, and those who develop those digital tools, they all need to come together and collaborate in order to be successful. It's not enough to bring electric trucks to the market and plug them and play. No, you need to understand the business reality of the logistics and the freight business. What are the real use cases? What are the travel, the distance patterns? Why do they stop? How much time do they have, etc. Then you want to hear from the grid guys what is possible in terms of charging capacity at the right locations. This is really crucial. And then when you start looking into how to optimize that picture with the charging services, the infrastructure solutions are here already today. There's no doubt about that. Once you get the picture right, things can move quickly. And what are we doing about it? Well, we recently announced a collaboration with Scania and Engie together and ourselves. It's a strong bus and trucking partnership that will start in 13 European countries and will grow to more in the next coming years. And we're really proud that we can really push forward this movement for solutions for electric buses and trucks on a pan-European level. Scaling up. How can we scale faster? First of all, we need to educate. There's a lot of people that still believe that EVs is a passenger car thing only. That's not correct. I mean, to give you an example, 9 of the freight trips, I mean, we just heard it in the previous story, in Europe today, cover a distance less than 300 kilometers. And they can happen mostly in urban areas. So those trips can easily be electrified by electric trucks, and those trucks are coming to the market already today. So what do we need to do to map this and to put the charging infrastructure in place in a smart way, and also get the support from the policymakers so that they can help to scale the development of charging strategies at cities, on a regional, on a national level, but also on a European level and on a global level. These plans should include charging ambitions and targets for hubs, for depots, for distribution centers, and also for public locations. And this needs to be mapped over time. These plans also look need to look at the grid requirements, because that's a critical point. We need to be able to deliver the capacity that is needed in the cities and the regions, because often that's the bottleneck, and we need to work with the network operators and the authorities to finance that upgrading of the grid. In the Netherlands and in California, for example, grid operators are already developing grid heat maps, which give indications on the favorable hookup sites, locations, and which makes it more convenient for operators to assess the business case to make those investments. The freight driver is an open market. So last but not least, policymakers shouldn't take care of the driver's needs. What does the driver really need? Infrastructure needs to be accessible and needs to work. And the key word here is interoperability. Driving doesn't stop at a regional or a national border. Trucks drive throughout Europe. Trucks passes borders. So let's open up networks and underpin it by open standards and protocols. That's it was really make a market grow and successful across the globe. In Europe, we are striving for such an open market model, and we are promoting it via an alliance with like-minded industry players that we recently have set up early this year. It's called Charge Up Europe. With this alliance, we are working towards rolling out EV charging solutions across Europe as fast as possible. We support the ambitions of the European Green Deal and reach out towards zero emission in transport to realize 3 million public charging stations by 2030. So altogether, our call and our support as EVBox Group, we call on each other countries, the regions and the world to do the same, to set ambitious zero emission ambitions for freight, and by defining fleet, emission and infrastructure targets. Those targets will provide clear invest signals to market players. Once set, we can count on the road to COP26 and beyond, and we're looking forward to be there next year and also make serious commitments. And last but not least, Monica, we really welcome the setup of the Zero Emission Vehicle Transition Council and their ambitions. Congrats with it, and many luck. EV proud.
Thank you, Christoph, for bringing that up. It's an en route to COP26 event, so it's good to hear you mentioning that. And also, you know, as a summary, the point about the power of collaboration is something that we embrace wholeheartedly. So I know you have to go. I hope you can stay for a few minutes, given that Nigel Topping is coming next, the high-level climate action champion for COP26, also known as my boss. So it's really great to have Nigel. Nigel, come on board. Tell us all the great stuff that you always share, and to, you know, energize us.
You know, I think I've just this morning was speaking to 300 amazing young people who've organized a mock COP, who are kind of frustrated and want to see us all going faster. And I have to say, 2 months ago, I might have thought that cement and freight were two of the more boring sectors. I'm sorry, Magali, I'm sorry, everybody who works in freight, but I think the young people would probably think that as well. But I have to say, once I got to know Magali and learn about the Lafarge plans, and then met Jan and Jamie, you start to realize that cement can be really exciting. In fact, when we did the TED Countdown series, which Monica, you spoke at in October, the talks about cement were some of the ones that had people talking the most. So when a sort of old, especially a business-to-business sector, suddenly bursts into life and innovation, it becomes really exciting. And I think the same thing is happening here with freight. You know, so I'm really excited by what I hear. I hear a whole ecosystem picking up pace and moving together. As Minister van Veldhoven said, it needs a whole systems approach. As Christoph said, it needs collaboration, what we call radical collaboration. And I think that when that happens, that's what drives exponential change. So, you know, I love the emphasis on ambition and action. You know, amazing to see this big policy signal coming from California plus other states and then the Netherlands coming together. I love the idea of the MOU. I'd be very surprised if the UK wasn't really interested in joining that quickly. So you should have that conversation soon. It's great to hear the voice of cities. I mean, Rotterdam, I had no idea Rotterdam was such a significant player both in road transport and sea transport. So very interesting there. Of course, there's lots of good collaborative work going on in the marine sector with the Getting to Zero coalition. I think we have a magic recipe here. We have a real sense of urgency. We have possibility. We know the technology exists and can be driven down the cost curves. We have very high levels of awareness. And now we add the ambitious commitments and action. That's what drives exponential growth. I love the idea of aligning around 30% by 2030. Only thing I would say is, why are you saying 100% by 2050? Maybe you're just trying to low bar it to coax people in. If you follow the exponential, if you go storming past 30% in 2030, then you'll be on track for 100% by 2040, which is actually what we need because of the science, right? Given that trucks last 10 years. So the one thing I'd love to hear is more clarity on those end dates from truck manufacturers. I mean, Monica and Sita, thank you for pulling together what we often call the ambition loop. We've got the policy side, and then all the private sector and non-state actors, so the cities, the infrastructure, the fleet owners, the fleet users. I mean, I think I did see, Magali, some very big numbers. A lot of trucks there that need to be turned into zero-emission vehicles. So very exciting to hear about the announcement of that initiative to put the ambition loop in Glasgow. There will be a transport day in Glasgow, so I'd urge you to come to Glasgow and show the world that the freight sector is committed to the race to zero as soon as possible, and make freight exciting, because that journey will be exciting. It'll be full of innovation. It'll attract great young engineers, and the winners in that competition will win market share, because although it's a race we have to win together, some people will go faster and some people will go slower. So really exciting to see the radical collaboration, the ambition, and the commitment to action. And I think the next 12 months give us a chance to really ratchet that up, to land that as one of the big stories when we all meet in Glasgow. So thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. And I know you have to go, but considering the question of this event is the end of the internal combustion engine for freight. So what's your prediction? When do you think we'll have that last freight, last internal combustion engine for freight?
As the minister said, it's not a question of if, it's a question of how. And I think to the same thing, to the question, is the end of ICE coming for freight? The question is not if, but when. And I think it will be in the 30s. I think it will be before 25. I have huge faith in our ability as engineers to drive innovation. These are big markets. The prizes are huge and the motivation's huge. I think it will be between 2035 and 2039.
Excellent. And that gives us a big, a good bridge to the next speakers, because we have Scania and we have Iveco. So let me welcome Åsa Pettersson from Scania. Åsa, where are you? The floor is yours. Welcome.
I'm right here in the city center of Stockholm.
Great.
Thank you very much for having me here tonight. Very happy to join this conversation on how to decarbonize the freight sector. And I agree with Nigel, it's a thrilling sector to work in for the time being. It hasn't been this much fun to work in the transport sector for the last 100 years. We're in the middle of this huge technology shift, actually. And we're seeing this starting to happen right now. We did a study a couple of years ago called the Pathway Study, where we looked into different scenarios of how to reach a decarbonized transport system by 2050, and very important, how to reach, not if possible to reach. So we set the scenarios in a backcasting mode to make sure that we did reach zero, because we know we have to reach the Paris Agreement. There is no other way to do this. So the question is, which technology and how fast can we decarbonize? So we looked into 4 different scenarios, one with full speed ahead on electrification, one where we use a maximum amount of biofuels as a complement to electricity. And we also looked into a scenario where we maximize the use of fuel cells and hydrogen, and then a mixed tech scenario as well as a 4th scenario. And of course, we tried to really pull the scenarios out to learn as much as possible from them. And when we see that when we go for full electrification, it's not only possible and the fastest way of reaching the climate Paris Agreement or a zero decarbonized transport system, but also the cheapest for society, because electricity is actually, and that's a driving force per se, it's a cheaper way of operating a transport system than diesel. Biofuels is also a possibility, but of course there are limitations in supply. So we can never decarbonize, of course, the whole transport system, but it's an important solution because we can use it on rolling fleets. And that's an interesting, of course, when you discuss when the end of the internal combustion engine appears. For us, it's more interesting to discuss if we have a fossil-free alternative. It's more the end of when the end of fossil fuels and the use of fossil fuels in the transport sector. That is really how to reach zero. We should use all available options. Hydrogen is a very interesting solution and upcoming, but it's still much more expensive than the other solutions. So we'll see where that is heading. And of course, somewhere the reality will of course be a mix of this. What is happening right now, though, is that Scania launched a series production of battery electric trucks. We announced that earlier this autumn. I have this truck behind me right now, our first battery electric distribution truck with a range of up to 250 kilometers, pure battery electric. And we will start series production in Sweden next year of this. And of course, then we need infrastructure, and that has been discussed a lot here already, as Bill already pointed out in his first keynote here. It can be an obstacle, but we need to really work together. And as also Christoph mentioned, that's why we have entered this partnership actually with ENGIE and EVBox to make sure, because for us, it's really down on the customer level. And we have always said that when our customers are ready, we are ready for battery electric trucks, and that time is now. But for each and one of those customers, we have to understand what are the routes they are driving, what is the pattern, and where can we set up the charging stations. And that is what we're going to do together with EVBox now in 13 European countries to begin with. So this is a big step forward, especially considering that for heavy duty transport, this infrastructure is basically non-existent for the time being. So this starts now. And of course, even considering, as I said, that electricity will be a cheaper option eventually, there is still a large need for investments right now. We both need to invest in the charging poles and the infrastructure, if it's overnight and depot charging to begin with in city distribution transport. And then we also have the possibility of a larger electrical road system with dynamic charging on the highways, where of course the highest emissions are happening. But and we also then need, and that was also mentioned here previously, to invest in the electrical grids. And that is really the large part of both the investment, but that is also what is taking longer time, because there are long lead times in investments in electrical grids. And we need to start taking these decisions now, because the products are coming and we need to be ready then as a society to meet the needs of a electrified road freight system. So that is very important, and that is why it's also important to work in larger partnerships together along the value chains with both infrastructure providers such as ENGIE and EVBox, but also together with electricity companies and the grid operators on all levels of the electrical system to really make this happen, and not the least to cooperate, of course, with policymakers. And as Alexandre Paco was mentioning also previously, I mean, of course, regulations are a big driver in this, but also the funding of this and how we can take these steps together with policy and industry and find the right ways of investing in this together, and how that and designing that system together. Of course, at the end of the day, this is all about making the fossil alternative more expensive than the fossil-free one, and that will push this transition going forward. Thank you very much.
Great, Elsa, and congratulations on that big project. And thank you so much also for pointing out the importance of finance. This is something that we see as critical as part of this Race to Zero Emissions Freight effort that we're putting together, joining forces between the TDA and the champions team. You know, bringing the financial sector on board is critical. Let's now turn to Iveco. We have Marco Licardo, who is the Chief Technology and Digital Officer at Iveco. Marco, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you for having me in this very interesting meeting and panel. So I think we are in the right direction at the end, because the climate change is in the top of the agenda of all the commercial and specialty vehicle industry. And I think that the European Union is making a very interesting milestones, achieving very interesting milestones, acting as a leader towards the climate, the carbon neutrality, thanks also to important steps such as the European Green Deal, for instance. As been already mentioned, one of the big drivers is the CO2 emission limit that we have. And if we consider the heavy-duty transport, that is probably the most difficult to decarbonize sector in the transport, if we consider the limits that there are going to be in the industry, 15% by 2025 in terms of CO2 and 30% by 2030, just to give in perspective, according to our estimation, to achieve this target, we need to introduce in 2025 between 5 and 10% of zero-emission heavy-duty trucks. If we consider the 2030 limit, this threshold is going to be around 20% and above. That is, in an average year, would represent 60,000 heavy-duty trucks, zero emissions. So is already a sort of ambition, an interesting challenge, but we need to start, and we need to start very fast, because we need to learn fast as well, not only in the technology per se, but also in the technology integrated in a broader ecosystem that is going to be crucial to be successful in this journey. The starting phase probably will not be perfect. That's the reason why, especially in the early stage, is going to be paramount that the policymakers are going to support the industry, as somebody said before, in terms of cost or total cost of ownership of the zero-emission heavy-duty trucks, but also promoting recharging and refilling infrastructure. And when we come to the hydrogen, also to the renewable hydrogen supply, in order to create a really a sustainable ecosystem around the technology. We as a company, we've been quite active in this decarbonization journey, fully committed for carbon neutrality by 2050. We are already providing in our lineup electrified vehicle, especially in the buses and in a van. Some solutions such as the natural gas, that especially when we run in biomethane, is going to be very interesting in terms of CO2 in a well-to-wheel perspective. But we are working also to introduce very soon heavy-duty battery electric vehicle in partnership with the Nikola Motor, and always in partnership with Nikola Motor, a fuel cell hydrogen heavy-duty trucks by 2023. Both coexisting, addressing different customer requirement, with the hydrogen fuel cell very much focused on the heavy long haul, where we think this is going to be the ultimate solution. In order to accelerate this transition, Iveco and FPT Industrial has already signed also the coalition statement of some days ago, acknowledged by the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking and the Hydrogen Europe, in order to make real the ambition of 100,000 hydrogen heavy-duty truck by 2030 and 1,500 hydrogen refilling station. This is very important, because we cannot, I cannot see this journey without a dense and very well distributed infrastructure when we come to recharging and refilling, completely in agreement with the European Green Deal objectives. We welcome the 2021 revision of the AFID, the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Directive, but hydrogen as well must be considered as a mandatory fuel. And we hope more and more integration between the 10E and 10T regulations, In fact, we think that the full success of this transition will be linked also to the capability to build an integrated and a sustainable ecosystem involving key stakeholders among OEMs, energy providers, European institutions, and at the end, the national governments. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for sharing that very concrete message, and it sounds like you have very big plans. So I would like to, before moving to the next session, I would like to bring Sita on board, given that we have to make a decision about whether to continue this very good conversation or go into breakout sessions. What do you think, Sita?
I think, Monica, thank you. Maybe it's a good idea if we shortly reflect, because I think we have to move to a different Zoom meeting for the breakout sessions. So I suggest we reflect on what we heard, and then we kind of share the next steps and the wrap up for that, if that's okay with you. So Chris, could you put up the slide with the commitments for non-state actors, just so that we refresh our memories? What is the work that needs to be done? So I'd really like to thank all the panel speakers, and really the sense of ambition and willingness to collaborate and move this forward is tangible, I think, in this session very much. So we've heard about the global MOU. We hope to announce the first signatories of that MOU in the coming months. So that's the national government's side of that, and we're very happy to do that together with CalSTART Drive to Zero and partners, for example, from the ITF. So that's the national government's part of that, and I was very much, that's the shame with this online thing, when Nigel said, I think the UK is willing to sign that as well. That's the kind of feeling I think that we all want. But yes, these are the kind of the draft headlines that we're looking at for the next steps. And we'd really like to invite all front-running, cities, companies, fleet owners to help us, form these and fine-tune these commitments into something that together, I see it as a puzzle, really, that we can make that puzzle clear so that we know what's going to happen in COP and how to accelerate that. And I'm very happy to share that our next kind of more high-level event will probably be the World Economic Forum annual meeting in May. So that's one thing to look forward to, and you will all receive an invitation for that. I don't know, Monica, is there anything you would like to add from your side?
I think for me is a big thank you for just being so collaborative or collaboration oriented. I think this is key. It came out in the panels. And I think the one message that I would like to put on the table as we wrap up is that between now and the COP, we have a lot of work to do about concrete things. And this Race to Zero campaign that will have a very strong component around freight is a very concrete example of something that will allow us to collaborate, think very big, so the companies can help us convey the message that having very clear targets is very important. So conveying that message from governments and conveying the same message from companies is very important. And then when we launch the campaign, the Race to Zero space will be online, so you can visit it, you can see what companies are doing what in terms of these front runners with concrete commitments. So think about OEMs, think about fleet owners, cities, investors, regions. So what we want to make sure is that we bring many on board, because it's not just going to be us, it's going to be a lot of partners. So if you want to get in touch with us, here's a slide for you. Those are our emails. If you have ideas, concrete ideas for next year in the run up to COP26 Zero Emission Freight, do contact Sita and I will be very happy to do that. So thank you for having me, Sita, and look forward to working with you. And thank you to all the panelists and all the people that joined.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you in the next step along the road.
See you. And you can scan here the rest of the sessions this week. And if you missed one or two, they will be recorded, so you can also watch them later. Thank you so much, and have a great evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever you are. Goodbye.
Bye.